Capcom are zombie games. They pretty much single-handedly generated this genre of survival horror, with the ginormous Resident Evil series that ripped its way onto the 32-bit era on Sega's Saturn and Sony's PlayStation. And September has been a big month for zombie reanimation, if you will. With the just-released Resident Evil 4 Remastered, I'm covering in an upcoming retro article, hitting now-gen consoles, it is not alone in its flesh and cash-consuming aims. With a two-prong attack this month, as Dead Rising also gets its own time in the spotlight thanks to a similar remaster on PC, PS4 and Xbox One, which thanks to review copies from Capcom is the version I'm covering here, along with the last-gen releases on PS3 and Xbox 360. Now with 4 titles to cover across multiple platforms, it will be a meaty feast to enjoy. So, with our aperitif served, let's enjoy the main course.
Still got it.
With the Biohazard series, to give it its correct Japanese title at least, having cornered the serious side of zombie apocalypse, well, mostly, Capcom's aims in partnership with Microsoft on the as-then exclusive Dead Rising came at the theme from a totally new angle. Goofy, kooky, comedy, or just plain wacky, its tongue was so far in its cheek, and it came out the other side. Ugh. Now with the original 360 title targeted squarely at the George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead masterpiece movie, with you running amok, armed only with a camera, Hawaiian shirt and bad puns at the start, you have to use your surrounding supplies to defeat the undead hordes, with varying levels of success and laughs. It still kept a sense of plot with its rather random but at times chucklesome story. It certainly was a fun and different title when released and sold well on the 360, shifting over 2 million units since its launch shortly after the 360 hit the market in 2006. Then and now we have a title that runs at a native 1280 by 720p with a variable 4x MSA solution, helping to keep the edges as smooth as possible. Now this fluctuates just like and with the engine load and thus frame rate, which itself is capped at 30 FPS with an adaptive VSync, allowing it to tear regularly in the game as you cut down the zombie hordes. Texture quality, shadow maps, polygon counts and animation all clearly demonstrate signs of its age and cost of such a vast zombie quota on the host hardware. It is still fun on the X360, but the near constant tearing can ruin the image quality and enjoyment. Thankfully, it does help keep the response and frame rate as high as possible, with only mild dips causing momentary issues, but nothing to greatly distract from the frantic fun to be had.
These ain't zombies. What would you call them?
So the latest Xbox One version, along with the PS4 and PC release, now deliver large increases over and above this 10-year-old base. But it all falls well within the standard remaster we have seen in previous Capcom releases this year, as I've already covered. A huge increase in pixel density of over 2 times does deliver a sharper and crisper image, even at the loss of the 360's MSA resolve, now replaced with a much simpler post-FXAA type pass. But as per usual, this is always much more on paper than on screen. Now this can leave the image quite noisy at points, with further issues created from the increased resolution and the same Gaussian blur filter revealing more detail and shimmer, all thanks to its increased resolution not being compensated here. Now sadly, textures are not equally upgraded and instead offer up sharper versions that highlight the lack of any improvements from the original release, instead with a simple upscale applied, and as such can look muddy, blurry and flat, with an obvious lack of normals at the very least. But the biggest improvement comes in the form of the doubled frame rate at 60 FPS, now fully V-synced, so the only tearing and shredding you see is always from the on-screen antics and not your TV display. A welcome benefit. Lighting quality, screen effects, filters do appear to match the 360 version, aside a higher gamma output, and as such this makes the game look brighter and detail is both richer and bleached in various areas, but it can be corrected within the gamma options. It is not a large upgrade and would most likely be missed aside this comparison. Just for note, both these versions run under the same settings. The improvements to controller response and refresh rate are very welcome and helpful in making it feel a more modern title, but it is not anywhere near as solid as it should be, certainly with the level of visuals on display here, but my first thoughts are due to CPU limits than any real GPU related ones. Damage from heavier objects causes pauses, a common trait in Japanese titles including the original. Cutscenes and zombies swamp sections can also cause further stutters, often fleeting and never caused by repeatable views or effects. This points towards the title not seeing much of an improvement of its core CPU render and logic code, with likely many cores being underused or largely idle here. It It is a fair remaster and can still bring a smile to your face as you mow down the fresh-seeking mob with better IQ and certainly a much better but not perfect frame rate. It is the best version to relive the title or get your first taste of the Dead Rising world, just not by any drastic level as such. Do not expect anything of significance over what you have already played on the 360.
Your performance was a little limp tonight, Frank.
So we move on to the second title in the set, which can also be bought individually or as a 3-title bundle, is shockingly called Dead Rising 2, but with a new start. It was also handled outside of Japan this time by Blue Castle Games, now Capcom Vancouver, as Capcom bought the company after the game's release and handed over the reins to the series from here on in partnership with Microsoft. The second game had some extra releases and DLC hitting not just the X360 but also the PC and PS3, which is the version we are looking at here for the last gen comparison. Taking further movie influences, this time from Arnie's own Running Man, that both the main and the off-the-record other release flow from, with an overlapping progression of similar events. Covered later. As per the first title, we have another MSA sample pattern used to clean the image up, dropped from a variable rate to a solid 2 times, which helps keep geometry as smooth as possible from its sub-native 1024x576-ish display. The Xbox 360 did manage to keep a 720 resolution here. Now, some of these changes are down to the use of a new engine, as here this time the team being outsourced did not have the option to use Capcom's own MT Frameworks engine that was debuted in the original title. But with their own solution, they bump up the zombie count from a mighty 500 to a meaty 7,000 in this new title. The 360 release did have more content with the Case Zero mode and DLC content returning Frank West into the mix, which also received the remaster touch. The PS3 release feels like it suffers from its 360 ported roots though, suffering sacrifices from the 360 version. You can see here from the Xbox One shadows on main characters near the start, with the Xbox One release having them all displayed. All point to quick wins for performance or simple errors. The PS3's lacking of shadow maps is a bit of a strange one. As are some of the changes to effects. As you can see here, the actual gamma output is again different on the Xbox One, much softer, and it's missing some of the specular reflections and the noise maps added to the PS3 release here, which are largely absent on the Xbox One version. The depth of field effect remains, and again, this is a higher resolution, which leaves the remaster with a slightly more washed out image quality. Frame rate is worse on the PS3 than the 360 original, even with the game's tearing still present. Heavier sections with vast amounts can see the PS3 dip to low 20s and even 15 in cutscenes, possibly due to lighting or geometry load here, as it struggles here even on the newer release. Now ultimately it is far from a solid performer, and the tearing, although helping response times, does affect enjoyment and IQ at varying levels throughout play. The game does manage to keep its Japanese humour intact though, but far more teenage related sexual gags included. So all these issues removed on the new release, you may ask? Well, at least on the Xbox One and most likely PS4, they are not eradicated, but are improved. Frame rates now happily hit 60Hz the majority of the time, but VSync is always employed here, and bigger dips into the low 40s still occur though, but at least with no split rendering that happens when the partially rendered new frame is mixed with the new one, as we saw on both last gen releases. The most obvious culprit being the gargantuan NPC count and the game's less optimal threading code most likely, the first game only using a smaller portion of the available cores. This looks to follow suit. Going back and threading render, animation, path, AI, etc. code would be much more expensive task than this remaster budget would have been afforded. Most likely, a small programmer team was allocated to this, so due to the large spike in CPU use in the newer title, it suffers far more than the generally more stable first title in this collection. Visual quality is enhanced over the PS3 release, much better textures due to the PC release at the time can now be used here, which offer clarity over the console's versions, again bumped up by the huge leap in resolution. All effects now present from the PC release, as essentially this is what we have here, a fast and clean PC port over to now gen consoles, demonstrated by no PC release of the pack outside the first title. If you have played or owned the PC release, then you will have absolutely nothing new here, and most likely will also have better performance. Now, it is a shame that more was not done to improve the game, as it sets us up for the latest chapter in the series and the also released off-the-record content included here that again operates just like the base game and PC release, meaning it is easily the best way to experience the game now on consoles, but PC players are not missing anything here at all. In the large zombie modes, it again can see low 40s on my frame rate application, mixed up with video sections complete with huge frame pacing issues present from the PS3 release, and the real-time sections can still see dips to 30 with a very undulating frame time graph representing the simplicity of the port. I would not be surprised at all to learn this title runs under the DX API for both now-gen consoles, easing its PC ported roots. The launch of the Xbox One saw the same team create a far more modern and impressive third title, moving to a physically based rendering solution using its own Forge engine, improved over its last gen release here. As it was originally a PC release, this helped the title achieve such a huge generational leap over the last gen versions we have just covered, and controversy followed the PC release as at launch it was capped at the same 30 rate as the console version, but was later patched with an unlocked option with no detrimental effects, despite warnings at the time that it may have indeed. It again ramped up the visual quality and mob count over the previous titles, using much better post effects from a decent motion blur on camera and objects. With it not always being present, it can make the frame rate feel worse at times, even when it is actually identical. Also using a bokeh depth of field, HDR bloom, all this was ramped up to the max in the long and story-driven real-time cinematics. Tearing was kept to flesh only in the cast and not on screen for Xbox One owners, meaning that the game adopted the same VSync lock as the remasters here. Physics and animation also saw the same boost, with a wider range of vehicles to borrow, build, destroy and clean up the undead streets. Customizing both weapons and characters into increasingly goofy suits and even dresses was not lost from the latest port, extended with the vehicular mods. And again, it was a decent seller on the Xbox One. Playing this side by side with the newly released remasters really highlights the gulf between them. And even though the 60Hz rate is a nicer experience, this pretty much locked 30Hz here in 3 is the better looking and more enjoyable of all the games. And yes, that includes the 720p resolution here rather than the 1080 of the remasters. I know it's a shocking revelation, cheesy story included, and because it sticks much closer to its 30 rate than the 60 we're seeing on both of these remasters, it actually feels more pleasing to play also. Which is an odd change, with the forthcoming Dead Rising 4 hitting in November, looking to adopt more of the cartoon style from the first two games, with similar asset quality material used in 3. This also appears to follow a far simpler and more comedic tale, more in line with the title's origins. I will be covering the title soon with an upcoming preview and hopefully a full review copy around launch, so stay tuned for that. Now, as much as I enjoy the Dead Rising titles, and these new remasters allow console players to pick up and enjoy them with the best quality available, I cannot recommend them for PC players aside the first title, and as fun and welcome as the boosts are, it is still not a $20 upgrade or around £15 over the last gen releases. The heart of the game is retained across all, but if you want to dig deep into the series, these are the best versions you can play on consoles. Just don't expect a greatly fleshed out package in the end. And as always, if you guys and girls enjoyed this, then please hit the like and subscribe button, as I really appreciate it and it helps support my channel and my work. Leave all your thoughts and feedback below. You take care, and I'll see you on the next one.